welcome everybody to the show. We got to get that thing fixed. Actually used the wrong musical intro last week and the correct one this week, and that's why you heard the same one twice in a row. So let's fix that, and off we go. So this is Counter Clipping Show number 173 for May 20th, 2024, and our topic tonight is new versus old Wargames, and we'll get into that momentarily. In the meantime, we are drinking, I think we might be trying to kill the Boulder Spirits American Single Malt Whiskey. This is a distillery out of the Colorado area. It's very good. There's a good number of different ones available. This is the peated malt. Don't let that scare you off. It is very mildly peated, and it is highly drinkable. So thank you, Dave, for sending this thing my way. All right, so... and we are clipping, and we might still be clipping this next week, at least if I don't get any non-show clipping done. We are still clipping Decision's version of War Between the States. Obviously, this is a fairly large game, so that's not particularly mysterious. But I kind of want to get this done so I can start working on Death Valley, my redux of Death Valley, doing it again. What fun. So we will hopefully... ooh, cool. So Jeff Baylor got charged for Operational Matters number 1 today. That's the reprint of the first issue with Sicily 2 in it. Excellent game, excellent magazine, well worth your time, and it's a pretty good introduction to OCS as well. So I want to say, let's see here. So before we get started, whoops, hopefully that wasn't too loud. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everybody to like the video, thumbs up if you haven't done so already. Subscribe to the channel if you have not done that already. And there's a bunch of ways down to the video description to support the channel if you are so inclined. But I'd like to thank everybody for coming out tonight, because by being here, you are in fact supporting the channel. So thank you, everyone. So before we get into that, I want to, let me flag this for later. I'm exploring the flagged comments for, flagging is not bad in this context, feature in StreamYard, so I can answer good questions that come up, that happen to have come up earlier in the show than I was paying attention to. So before we go any further, let's say hello to Aaron Danis, Alistair Logie, Biasia Atkins, B. New. I think that's the same person. I don't know, but congrats to both of you. Bill Simone, Bob Cometh, Brian Jarvis, Captain Nolan, Carl Fung. Carl, thanks for stopping by. Chad Kennedy, Charles Latorre, Christophe de Klerk, Christopher Smith, Clark Commando 1983. Mark, thanks for stopping by. I hope you're feeling better. Daniel Silverthorne, David Imperato, Ed Holtzman, Eric Goebel, Grunyard, Rich, HUN644 New, Jeff Beeler, Jeffrey Wesovich, Joe Hammond, Joe Okabayashi, John Madison, John Clark, Kyle Harris, Lee Grant, Mark Hodgkinson, Meandering Mike, Michael Avanzini, Molotov Cockatiel Games, Paul Sin, Paw Paw, Perfidious Albion, Philip Musket, Ray Musselman, Rogue 77, Ryan Huard. Did I get that wrong again? Scott Bell, Sean Torno, Stacking Limit, Stigler, Tim Greenhoff, Vicky, welcome back to the show. Vince Reeve, Vincenzo Beretta, William Bird, and Wolf Dog. So let me apologize to anybody that I missed in that rundown, but it's YouTube's fault. So I think we will finish the Confederate units tonight, and then all we have to do after that is the markers. So that will be pretty good. And Hexy's here. Hexy, thanks for stopping by. That is exactly the vibe I get sometimes, to be completely honest. I didn't have time before the show to pull these down, but Brant did these. Brant over at the Armchair Dragoons did these fantastic Artie's bingo cards, off-topic bingo cards. It was pretty. I was highly amused by them, so we may be featuring those in a future episode, as Brant intimates right here. I used to run a lot of the local games auctions in Northeast Ohio while that was still a thing that we could do. Not the big ones like the ones at Origins, but like the little game store ones. I ran a bunch of those. So it's not really auctioneer training, but I have actually been an auctioneer in the sense of, low rent games auctions. But we are not legally allowed to do that anymore, unfortunately. Dale Brady, thank you and your wife for being awesome. So let's see here. So I got a couple of shout outs to go through. I would like to thank Greg Mumm and Scott Rowland for joining in the Patreon team. So thanks, Greg and Scott. They're in the They are in the ticker, as well as an updated link to the Ardwulf Lair Discord community. Also, you should all know something important about the Noble Knight sale, which is currently going on and which will be running until 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. I believe that's 8 a.m. Central Time, which means 9 a.m. Eastern Time. So, you know, you want to take your chances on that, go ahead. I don't have that confirmation. I was just told 8 a.m. So there's an affiliate link in the video description that you can use to help support the channel and buy yourself something nice from Noble Knight. And now is a great time to do that. So I'd like to thank everybody that made a certain thing possible that we will be discussing basically right now. So, and also to shout out to Noble Knight, the official sponsor of the Counter Clipping Show. What the hell just happened? There we go. There we go. The official sponsor of the Counter Clipping Show. And I've got a story about this too. So we are officially 1/3 of the way done with the campaign for the Finnish Trilogy, and Volume 1 arrived today. Let me know who is first to spot the problem that we have here with Volume 1. This is Volume 2. So I called them up just in the interest of keeping everything straight, and of course they were super supportive about it, and the resolution that we came up with, we will just, I'm keeping this one and I'll buy a Volume 1 so I bought Volume 2 first and then I'll get Volume 1 second. It arguably is probably a better idea to buy Volume 2 first, because that's the actual continuation war, the part of the conflict on the Eastern Front where the Soviets are fighting both the Germans and the Finns. So it's probably the part that that more people want, I would think. I noticed something immediately, a couple of things immediately about the contents of the game. One, it does use specialized dice. Now, they're not super duper specialized. They are D6s numbered 0 through 5, as far as I could tell. But other than that little bit of weirdness, it's pretty nice. And I am very happy. I'm at a glance. I only counted the maps and the counter sheets. I got to check the entire thing, but I am confident that everything is here. Certainly the rule books. There's like a rule book, and there's like 3 orders of battle books, and there's a bunch of maps and 11 counter sheets, and those are all there. So as far as play aids and stuff, I'm not 100% sure. I didn't check that stuff. But it all looks very splendid, and I'm very pleased with it at a very brief glance. So we will eventually do some video on these games, but that is probably going to wait until they are all here. This is absolutely, totally workable, but they give you some specialized 0 through 5 dice in the box. So I'm not really worried about that. Volume 3 is the one that's there. So all 3 games are actually standalones. However, Volume 3 does have some expansion material for the first 2 volumes. This is really the definitive treatment of this topic. I mean, the only thing vaguely comparable to it that I've got is the Europa game, A Winter War, which is actually cool looking, and I wouldn't mind playing it at some point. They're all really similar looking, so this is a really easy mispick to make, in my opinion. So I made sure that Noble Knight isn't going to fire anybody about this unfortunate error that everybody is in fact completely happy with at the end of the day. I am perfectly happy having gotten Volume 2 first. I wanted Volume 1 first, but the only reason for that is because they didn't have Volume 2, or so we thought at the time. So once again, they're an absolute delight to deal with. If there's any kind of problem, they will, or a non-problem in this case, they all go for roughly the same amount of money. There is a great deal of woods and marsh and frozen marsh on the maps, as you would imagine for Finland. I have not tried to set the whole thing up, obviously. I mean, I haven't tried to even lay the maps out, but one can absolutely see the amount of love and detail that went into at least the Volume 2 that I'm looking at right now, and I have no reason to think it's any different for Volumes 1 and 3. So they are extra busy right now. Oops, they are extra busy right now. Too bad you didn't get a second copy of the first one, because that's the one that's out of print and hard to get. I've got Limanova and Assault Artillery. By the way, Assault Artillery means tanks in the context of World War I, by the way. But they are extra busy right now. due to the sale. It's a pretty high volume sale. It's one of their big sales each year, and it runs through tomorrow. So your support is appreciated. And we did gangbusters last time, so I was very happy with that. I am working towards, and we're not doing like a campaign for this or anything. I'm just kind of ordering this stuff piecemeal as it either becomes available or as the money arrives. I am working on a show plan for, a two show plan. One is on RPGs published by wargaming companies, which I mentioned before. And it occurred to me while setting that up and starting to write some of it down that Hakapala is, that's true, but that's roughly the same scale as it's not quite, but it's close to the same scale as Europa. This is I don't know what the hex scale is, but it's a visibly smaller hex. I mean, there's 11 counter sheets in this thing. It's a lot. Mr. Mark Herman, thanks for stopping by. So I've got there's a lot to talk about tonight, even before we get to the topic. So we've got that. We've got Charles S. Roberts Awards news, which will be coming along in the next few weeks. We've got Origins, which is coming up in approximately a month. We've got this thing that showed up. We've got more. Do I have any with me here in the thing? No, I don't have any with me. So I've got new Tray Divider 3D models, which will be available to patrons for swordsman level and up patrons. And those will be along very soon. Unless I screw something up, they will be available to patrons by next week, because I prototyped the last thing that I needed today, which was the tray dividers for the shorter trays that Cube for Me makes. Those are these 8mm trays. So I don't have a really good way to measure like the internal height of these trays, so I kind of have to figure it out via prototyping. And I can eyeball it and get it pretty close, but I may have to print 3 or 4 prototypes. So this is one of the 8mm trays. It's very thin. So we'll have 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 compartment dividers. I don't believe that the 6 compartment dividers will be useful, but we'll make them available anyway. So in any case, let's dump out another baggie of War Between the States counters. Ugh. This is fair. This is fair. They chose the acronym after all, so it is their fault. John Stanley, I'm going to hopefully have this ready to go by next week. I will personally make those cards available and use them as visual aids on the show. Mark is referring to some kind of iPhone tool. I don't have an iPhone. So the difficulty is the depth of the tray, including the amount that you lose from the lid, and that is difficult to measure because you can't get inside the tray. I guess I could measure it easily enough if I cut a tray apart, but I don't want to cut a tray apart because they're coming from Poland. They're not that easy to get. So this is an interesting idea. I did do Commands and Colors block storage 3D models, and it's vastly impractical. The method that I hit upon for doing it is just super duper impractical, and I never released those models. And nor did I finish the set for myself. So, because there's different numbers of pieces, like every Commands and Colors Napoleonics, for example, set that you buy, you get like more French, for example. Stuka Joe is here. Joe, thanks for stopping by. This is actually a perfectly valid idea. I might actually try this in the future. Of course, different counters are different thicknesses. I think the thinnest counters I personally have in any game are the counters from the campaigns of Robert E. Lee from Clash of Arms. They are wafer thin. Well, in any case, Mark, I have made the measurement, and the models are, I just have to build the STL files, and I think the models are okay at this point. No, Mike, these are, I'm unaware of any affiliation between Cube for Me and Tactica e Strategia or Stratagemata. But hey, what do I know? There could be a relationship there that I'm simply not aware of. I have a digital caliper, but I can't get inside the tray with the lid on unless I cut the tray apart. And Charles Latour mentions that Worthington is having a Memorial Day sale. So in any case, I want to thank the supporters of the show, which includes everybody that comes out every week and everybody that comes by occasionally. And everybody who has used the affiliate link for Noble Knight, which has been an enormous help for me in terms of getting some stuff that I otherwise was not going to be able to acquire. There are some misprint issues on these counters, by the way, not the Finnish Trilogy counters, but the War Between the States counters. Decision's doing a lot better with this nowadays, in my opinion. This is a good idea too. See, you guys should be engineers or something. I'm not an engineer, so there you go. It's, we're getting into measuring methods so arcane here that it is easier for me to take 10 minutes to print out a model, and then if I need to, I can add a millimeter or half a millimeter. The Quinto counters were super thick, but those trays sucked though. But the battle line counters were, as best I can recall, just as thick. So, and it is the height of the stack, and how many stacks you can fit in a given compartment too, right? So these Cube for Me trays will fit 9 stacks of half-inch counters, and I haven't actually measured them for 9/16 or for 5/8 inch counters yet, but they'll fit at least 4 stacks of 5/8 inch counters. So there we go. Nice move. Eric Schaefer has picked up Axis Empires. Yeah, exactly. With, it's an expensive game. I think it's worth it, but I'm not going to try and tell people it isn't expensive. Oh, Vincenzo asks about, maybe Mark Herman will have something to say about this, because somebody might have talked to Mark about this, but I do believe that there is some kind of thingamabob that is being worked on, and I don't know enough about it to comment on it intelligently, but I believe that somebody is working on some kind of revision to this, at least to the system, at least some new game using the system, but I'm not sure about the details at this time. So it's all good, Mark. I appreciate the support either way, but folks are not going to remember every single time. So it's all good. So, and yeah, I picked up Gulf Strike on the strength of A, Mark as the designer, and B, that it's probably the definitive game on its topic. So there you go. This may be what I'm thinking of, but Red Strike is topically different. I think this is a good point. I have kind of made an unexamined assumption that it is the same scale across all 3 games, but I don't actually know that that is the case. So, oh, look at that. There you go. Music and news here, folks. Gulf Strike 2 coming from Vuka and Yves Rattel, who is the designer of Red Strike. And although I personally didn't buy it, I have heard nothing but good things about Red Strike. So, and I have seen it physically, and it is a gorgeous product. Frankly, as is everything that Vuka's doing. So that is actually really awesome news. So I am delighted about that. I think Mark's been working on this too. So, but I will let him address that, since I basically have exactly as much information as I just said. So I don't have a update for, there might be an update for the Greatest Day Utah Beach pretty soon. That ought to hit shipping sometime in the next few weeks. So, all right. So Mike Reed says that Volume 3 and Torneo are different scales. Interesting. Mad Dog of the Med. That's a great title. I think that's a great title. So I forget where I saw this. I imagine it was Eve that said it, but I don't remember where I saw it. So Army of the Potomac. Well, fortunately, Mark, you don't have to worry about it hitting its P500 number. Not that was ever in doubt anyway, to be frank. All right. Anyway, folks, super chats and super stickers are on, so it's a good way to get your comment highlighted, so I will not miss it. I am guaranteed to respond in some capacity to a super chat or super sticker message, just because this is definitely not where I saw it. I think I saw it on Facebook, but I could be nuts. So this is really good news, to be honest. All right, we've got a couple of things. So news you can use here, folks. Stigler is working on a Vassal module for a Decision Games product. Stigler, I'm proud of you, and Stigler will be autographing at Foxconn in Dallas in August, side by side with Doc. It's going to be a glorious sight. Jeff Beeler asks, what are the ages of wargaming considered to be? When was the first golden age, for example? I think this is a great question. This is probably worthy of its own show. But let me come back to that in a second here. Captain Nolan asks, how much, I assume this is directed to me, how much time do I spend clipping versus playing games? I never don't play a game because I want to clip games instead. That is not a choice that ever happens to anybody. I clip stuff in times that I wouldn't ordinarily be playing games anyway, like while I'm sitting in front of the computer or watching television or something like that. These are reasonable times to watch television, and you can, as I have proven week after week, you can do this with no mental effort whatsoever after a short amount of time, even with the newly noiseless clipper. I actually lubed it up with some took it apart, lubed it up with some WD-40 today, so it will be no longer squeaky. I've got a good chunk of I keep doing this. I've got a good chunk of decision product at this point, and I don't regret any of that. So when the golden age begins or when the golden age ends is, of course, going to depend on who you ask. Although I do think that there would be a lot of people who would say that the golden age ends in early 1982 when SPI disappears into the foul depths of TSR. But there are absolutely people who will say the golden age was the 60s, right? Where you had an Avalon Hill game once a year and that was all you had. I personally would be inclined to say if we have a first golden age, it's around, it starts around 1969, 1970, when SPI begins putting out larger quantities of product. I think SPI's first game is in 68 or 69, something like that. By 72, SPI is basically in full swing, as far as I can tell, just looking at games that are released. And it's at that point that they start, I don't know if competing with Avalon Hill is the right term, but they certainly start sucking up a fair amount of the oxygen in the room, which prior to that was exclusively Avalon Hills. Now, as to when our second golden age starts, that also is going to depend on who you ask. And we will also say that, that has a bearing on the topic tonight, right? So I am using the Oregon Laminations this is the 2mm corner rounder. If you're just going to buy one, I recommend the 2.5. You can get them through Amazon or you can get them from Oregon Laminations. It doesn't matter where you buy them. They are nowadays the same price and they both ship from Oregon Laminations. Avalon Hill is, as we would define this term today, Hexagon or Wargame Company. Remember, the first few games were on square grids, not hex grids. But that aside, yeah, Avalon Hill is basically the first company. I mean, you got Tactics 2, both of which are on square grids. You had the first edition of Gettysburg, which is on a square grid. They later redid it as a hex game and then went back later on to do it as another edition on a square grid. And then subsequent versions of it were basically completely different games, and those were all on hex grids as well. So I am in agreement with this general thesis that our second golden age, the genesis of... Now, you made me start thinking about this, and I had second thoughts. I think there are two driver. Well, there's three. The third is the biggest one, which is the board game boom that we're experiencing now, which has had a substantial carryover effect on Wargames as well. But I think the two drivers that are like creative drivers of the wargame renaissance, if you will, are GMT, I think, is one of them, and the other one is Dean Essig, who, kind of made a successful company and a successful effort in legendary games and legendary game systems in a time when, like, literally nobody thought this was even possible anymore. So Victory Games, Mark's here, so I think he can speak to exactly when Victory Games as an actual group wrapped up as opposed to just a label that Avalon Hill may have issued a couple of things under. I'm not sure if that's really what I don't know if I can think of any examples where that's the case. Let me put it that way. The clip will be very tight for 1-inch counters. 1-inch counters is the reason I have a 3mm clipper. And 3mm, my 3mm clip's huge. But I will warn you that the 3mm clipper will clip way too much for anything smaller than 5/8, and it's a really aggressive clip even on 5/8 inch counters. So Mark has the definitive, and this is about what I figured, right? 82 to 87, right? So spring 82 to winter of 87. So Jeff Beeler says post SPI the death of Avalon Hill is another age featuring. So this is fair. This is the sort of that like victory games. If there's like a bunch of death knells of wargaming, right? And people have been talking about wargaming dying since at least the mid 70s, and so I don't take it particularly seriously. But there are some there are 3 signature death knells of wargaming that happened over the course of the history of commercial hobby wargaming, right? One is SPI getting taken over by TSR, to whatever extent that's an accurate description of what happened. One is obviously Avalon Hill getting absorbed by Hasbro, which is probably more traumatic, if anything. And the third is probably Victory Games going away, because there was a tremendous amount of innovation. I don't want to say that SPI was carrying the flame for that Victory Games was carrying the flame for SPI, because I think that Victory Games had their own style that certainly learned from what SPI had been doing, but they had their own thing going on too, and you can't see them on the show. How many Victory Games do I have? About 15, something like that, off the top of my head. So one of the things that I got to do for that RPGs published by Wargaming Companies video is get the rest of them that I don't have. Now I have most of them, but I don't have James Bond 007 anymore, which is a really strong game, by the way. I have all of them from SPI, assuming we're counting Commando. I picked that up. It was very cheap. I need Cadillacs and Dinosaurs from GDW, Tales from the Floating Vagabond from Avalon Hill, and actually Lords of Creation by local RPG legend Tom Moldvay. He was from Akron, Canton area. So Chad Canetti, thank you so much for the support. It is much appreciated. This is fair, right? I mean, we don't know. You know, there's a long history of war games. Not every old war game holds up very well, and we're kind of drifting into the topic here, or shambling into the topic, as it were. There's plenty of people who've gotten into war games in the last few years because for a number of reasons, I think, but the obvious one is GMT and their ability to kind of cross over to some extent into non-wargaming spaces. Now, I don't think that ability is quite as powerful as GMT seems to think it is, considering that there's been a number of games that are those types of crossover games that have showed up on P500 and languished because the GMT audience just really wasn't into them. And some of those games sound fairly interesting. Now, well, so this is another. So thank you, Chad Canetti, for the support. It is much appreciated. Distribution collapse. This was a big deal, but it did not hit Wargames as hard because Wargames had already begun to transition away from the traditional hobby store distribution chain, right? This is why if you were on, the Gamers Christmas list, you got a counter sheet or half a counter sheet every year, right? I think they did most of their sales direct. I doubt they sold most of them through brick and mortar game stores. And certainly, I have to think, I have no metrics to prove this, of course, but I have to think that nowadays, most games are in fact sold online, and most games of all kinds, analog games anyway, are sold on the internet rather than being bought in a brick and mortar store. Well, you might recall, Vincenzo, that TSR did a Red Storm Rising licensed game. So I don't know how well that game did. It certainly, and a Hunt for Red October game as well. And the Hunt for Red October game is supposed to be not too bad. I would describe it as not simmy at all and very board gamey, but I mean, that's just at a glance. I've never played it. So Mark Hodgkinson says he sees it as SPI Victory and then GMT the Gamers and OSG. OSG is really small. I hate to draw industry-wide, make industry-wide statements on the basis of OSG. That again, OSG's been around for a long time too, in one form or another. So, and Decision has been around since the. Geez, I don't know. I'd have to actually figure that out, unless we ask Doc, which is possible. So go watch the interview with Doc Cummins of Decision Games, and maybe we said that. So now I think though that there is a definite. Oh, holy cow! We got support here. Thanks, folks. John Stanley, I was thinking of that game about Puerto Rico rather than the game about than Mystery Wizard as such. But Mystery Wizard is another example of a game that just wasn't speaking to GMT's audience, right? I think this is the consensus, actually, that it is better than you'd expect, considering it's a licensed product and it's from TSR, which had a fairly mixed record for Wargames. And thank you, by the way, John Stanley, for the support. It is much appreciated. I want to say this is true too, but ask Larry Bond. So what can I say? Or Tom Clancy, but he's dead. You can't ask him. Captain Nolan says that Red Storm Rising is available for $35 on BGG. It'd be interesting to check those games out, but I am not going to run those games down. So I would characterize Decision as, certainly they showed up in they were there in the 90s, and I would say that they're sort of part. I don't want to use the term new wave, because there's a bunch of negative baggage that term has, but they're certainly one of the current crop of stronger war game publishers, which I would characterize. I'm not talking about in terms of how strong the company is so much as, they've been around for a while. They're releasing a decent quantity of stuff every year. So of the sort of big four, I guess we're going to have GMT, which is quite a bit larger than the rest. MMP, I would say, but MMP is really kind of small in comparison. If you think about it, they release half a dozen products a year, something like that. GMT releases 4 products a month. I would hope that Borakin is the game I was thinking of, and I would hope that Borakin will show up someplace else, because it sounded fairly interesting to me. This was the negative baggage that I was speaking of, Alistair. So yes. So Jeff Beeler mentions the Wargamer, which is actually a good call. I think it's easy to miss nowadays just how important the magazines were to Wargames for a long, long time. I think they still are to some extent. But now the only magazines that are really still around are magazines that are delivering games with the issues, right? The only example I can think of domestically with a print magazine is War Diary. And War Diary doesn't seem to get a lot of attention. I think that's unfortunate. I think it's a terrific magazine, but it generally doesn't come with a game. I think they may have done a game in one issue, or maybe they just published a game that was not in the magazine. But it is a terrific magazine, and you can also buy it electronically, which is probably what I would recommend doing, but that's because I space is at a premium. I would, this sounds right? TSR's Perfidious Albion says that both of those games from TSR were basically introductory war games that you could use to bring additional people in. Did those have an SPI brand symbol on them, I wonder? I don't know. Flock of Seagulls is a band I was not into, to be completely honest about it. No, I didn't know this. I might have to take a look at that. I am all about obtaining copies legally, and I have no reason to think that product has lapsed. I don't know where so the Cadillacs and Dinosaurs RPG was a licensed RPG based on, I believe, a comic book or graphic novel series or something like that. And Lion in the Sand, actually, good call, Christopher Smith. That was also popped up in this same era of TSR, sort of big flat box war games, or introductory war games, or whatever we want to call them. Rogue 77 says GMT never prints enough. Sure, but nobody else is either, to be fair. I feel like Compass is doing the best job with this, in that they'll basically reprint. If Bill thinks it's going to sell, he'll reprint. So I am unclear as to what the copyright status of the Cadillacs and Dinosaurs RPG would be, because I don't know who the designer was. So off the top of my head, that's something I've never owned. I have zero interest in it as an intellectual property, and I am only buying it for research purposes. And looking at the prices, it probably goes for more than I'm extremely comfortable playing. But if we have to do a Noble Knight campaign on it, we can do that. Of the RPGs I would need, weirdly, the two most expensive ones are probably Powers and Perils and Dragon Quest. It could be a Frank Chadwick game. I just don't know that because it's never been anything that I took any interest in at all. So this is absolutely right, which is why, the Dots didn't really seem to care much that they had sold the whole hobby down the river to Hasbro. So I'm not pissed about it at all. So Captain Nolan, it does know apparently. So apparently it is Frank Chadwick. Frank was designing a lot of their stuff during that era. Let me put it that way. So apparently there's a lot more people who've looked at that game in the chat than I anticipated. I don't think this is an actual plan. But these things are now going for John, hold on a second. Is this the one you're talking about? This one with the dudes and the cat thing on the front? Is that the one you're talking about? Because I actually wouldn't call this Rolemaster First Edition. That's a bit pedantic of me to say that, but I actually would call this sort of like 1.5. This is Rolemaster First Edition. So I unfortunately don't have all my. I did dump my stuff at one point in favor of standard system, and I probably shouldn't have done that. Some of some of that stuff is very pricey. It is fair, John, to call that edition First Edition because it's basically First Edition. So I don't know anything about the components or anything like that. I have only observed that Another Glorious Day in the Core is one of the finest RPG adjacent product titles that I have ever heard of. So, yeah, other than the Traveler, which is going upstairs when the office moves, all the RPG stuff is right here next to me. You can't see it, and I'm not going to move the webcam to show you, but all the RPG stuff is right here. So what I wish I had was the Rolemaster, what I would call Rolemaster Second Edition, which was the ones with the red steins. I might have a spell law, but I don't have anything else. I should never have gotten rid of that. To be fair, I keep my stuff generally in very good condition. That stuff was beat to hell because it got the absolute pants played off of it back in the 90s. So anyway, are today's war games better than older war games? Now, some folks have already opined on this, and I'm inclined to agree with those folks that says that today's games tend to be better than the older games. I'm inclined to say that on average, I think that's probably correct. Findle70, thank you so much for the support. It is much appreciated. Someone named Joe Browning did a retro clone copy of the original system on drive-thru. So it's perfectly okay to do this retro clone stuff, but the James Bond RPG as published will never come back because it was a licensed thing and you're never going to get the license. The license would cost literally millions of dollars now. I don't know, millions, but it would cost a lot more than a podunk RPG publishers could afford. So that game's never coming back. Marvel Superheroes is never coming back. That's another really good game that was underappreciated in its day. And I didn't really want to spend this much time talking about RPGs tonight, but there we go. So, but there is a retro clone type of thing on Marvel Superheroes as well. So, all right, so Captain Nolan says, probably, I'll take this to mean probably the new games are better on average, but he likes the SPI graphics better than anything he's seen since. I won't say that, but I will say that I think SPI's graphics were the best around at the time SPI was around. Let me put it that way. Perfidious Albion says new games are probably better, but he looks at the new additions as enriching the games as a whole. Sure. So we have a broader selection of acceptable mechanics to use nowadays than we had in previous eras. Okay, and I guess I'm talking, that's not a new phenomenon. So I'm really kind of talking about the 70s and 80s, right, where we had a lot of very traditional designs, and those designs that maybe tried to break from that a little bit. I'm thinking of Tito specifically, or maybe Plot to Assassinate Hitler. Those games tended not to be particularly warmly received. I did like GDW's counters, and I didn't hate their maps. They were fine at the time, but I think SPI's maps were generally better, and certainly in parts of the period when SPI began to become paranoid later on about gutter sizes and stuff like that to avoid significant registration issues, I think their counters became a lot less readable at that time. So Findle70 also mentions, of course, the killer factor that's always appropriate to talk about in these conversations, which is nostalgia, right? Those games that we played back in the day are going to be games that are meaningful to us. So that is why I have reacquired so many of the things that I played back in the day or had back in the day or whatever, because they meant something to me at the time, right? All right, Rogue77 says he got into wargaming because of the new art, better components. I mean, so overall, I mean, remember the like level of tools you had available with the wax paste ups and all that bullshit that they had to deal with back in the 70s. That simply is not a thing that anybody deals with anymore, except for Kevin Simbayeta. He still, at last I heard, was still using a hot wax machine and paste ups and glue and that kind of bullshit to do his layouts, and that's just insane. Everybody else is doing it with actual software now. So the tools are far better. The printing technology is far better. There's, I think, no reasonable way to argue with that. So I am in neuroassociate. Yeah, so this is absolutely right. Stuka Joe, the neuroscientist / philosopher. But he's right. I mean, it's about your brain as associated. It's a golden age in your life, and those were the things you were doing at the time. So Gerardo, thanks for stopping by. Came by to say, yes, modern games are way better. Nostalgia from the older wargamers is the only reason there's any doubt. I'm not sure there's that much doubt, to be honest about it. And there are also, I mean, we're muddying the waters here, but we have to observe that there are plenty of older games that still hold up. There's a lot that don't. I think there's more that don't. But if we say, take a look at, pick a random relatively recent year, say 2020. So we have a couple of years of perspective on these games. Games that came out in 2020, I think on average are probably going to be better than games that came out in 1980 on average. But that doesn't mean, right? A lot of people will, I'm going to draw a music analogy here right after I thank Vincenzo for the support. It is much appreciated. Marco wrote a book about the current golden age of board games. I forget what this book was called because I didn't buy it, but I probably ought to. But I am aware of Marco's book. Many of the concepts are true for wargames too. Yes, that's absolutely right. And this is, I have complex feelings about better interaction and alternate activations that is probably worthy of a show on its own. But thank you, Vincenzo, for the support. And I don't think Marco's wrong here. For me personally, I would add some, additional context. Stigler's, he defined it as taste, and that's certainly true, right? Taste is going to be a huge factor. Nostalgia is going to be a driver of taste. Older games had a cool factor for new game mechanics. So did anybody say to themselves when they first bought that first edition of, say, For the People, We the People, boy, this has a cool factor. I don't know if that would have been the conversation. I think people could and did observe that, hey, here's a really interesting new mechanic. I wonder if anybody else will pick up on this mechanic. Turned out that the answer was yes. So Findle70 mentions when he pulls out an older game, he can't get over how small the print is, how compressed and dense the rules are, how there's no play aids. So no play aids is a significant factor, actually. even modern publishers could be doing better about this. And I'm thinking specifically about the game we just played, which is not an incredibly recent game, but it's not super duper old either. Dead of Winter, GBACW. It occurred to me while playing that, hey, the play aids here could be better. We've got those activation cards. Stigler, I really wanted to send this to you, but I have not had time to write this up, so I'm going to talk about it here. This is one of those areas in which there is a clear, vast superiority in many, but not all necessarily, modern games versus games that might have come out 30 years ago, right? Is the play aids, right? We have, generally speaking, a lot less stuff on, like, important stuff on the map. And we have a player aid card. What were there? I'm trying to think of an SPI game that had player aid cards. Some of the bigger ones, maybe, but I can't think of a lot of examples of that. This is totally why I picked this thing up again too, and you can see it see it right here too. Freedom in the Galaxy. That wasn't the edition I had. I had the Avalon Hill one, but that's got that shitty one-piece map, so I went with the SPI one instead. Perfidious Albion invokes the Holy Panzerblitz. That is fair, out of sentimental value, and so some of the games. So I am actually kind of curious about how I interact with some of these older games. Like, I've mentioned in the past that my first hobby war game and my first hobby game of any kind was Paratroop out of S&T 78 or whatever it was. It's roughly an 80-81 game, something like that. So, I was mesmerized by that thing whenever it came out, when I was like 10. But I am curious now how well I think that would hold up. So that is why I picked that up. And S&T games are a wonderful gateway to older war games because they generally can be had relatively cheap. Mac Reed mentions that die cutting today is so much better. That's just totally accurate. That's not to say there's no issues. There's definitely issues, but it is definitely true to observe that die cutting today is superior to what it was in previous decades. So physical components aside, right? I think generally people are going to agree, again, on average, that the graphical swag of newer games is way nicer than how good older games looked, okay? Part of that's changing tastes, but a huge component is changing technology and putting more capabilities in the hands of the people that do the graphics on these things. But part of it is just taste too. I have a tremendous fondness for like that traditional GMT look with the Mark Simonich or sometimes Roger McGowan maps and the Roger McGowan box covers and the kind of traditional GMT layout, which only in pretty recent years have they really tried very hard to distinguish themselves or distinguish newer games from looking like that. Captain Nolan says, so this is a factor, and I have felt this way about certain games that can seem very cluttered. But certainly older games are not immune to this. I mean, the vehicle counters, even in the original Squad Leader, much less in ASL, for example, which is certainly not what you would call a modern graphical fidelity, are very, very, very cluttered, right? I have also seen maps that are really, really cluttered. One example was Conflict of Heroes. I think I'm getting the name right. The Guadalcanal game. You couldn't see the hex grid. It looks like everything was super duper high saturation, counters, maps, everything. And I found it very graphically. I found it very muddy. And not in the sense that everything was brown. That wasn't the case, but I felt like everything kind of bled together, and I did not like the overall aggregate visual effect of it. Trying to keep these sorted here. Newer games often have larger and better counters. I mean, larger, certainly. Yeah. I mean, we've seen a lot of fairly standard war games that nobody would think twice about issuing half-inch counters with recently, that now come with, sometimes as big as 1-inch counters in a few cases. Now, so I want to add that Robert Martin, first of all, welcome to the show, this is his taste and cool, right? I mean, if it is your preference, to play the older stuff versus the newer stuff, then awesome, play the older stuff, right? Assuming you could find other people to play the older stuff with, or whatever else, whatever other approach you might have. The question is that there is certainly some degree, I will not pretend or claim, because I think this would be an asinine thing to say, that there is a completely objective measure of better. There really isn't, right? However, that said, we can also, it's not entirely subjective either, right? We can say, hey, this is a game that released with just an absolute butt ton of errata. And it's a problem, right? And I can pull new games out that had a lot of problems coming out, even released in the last couple of years. Clash of Monarchs, Clash of whatever the Clash thing was that GMT did in the last year and a half. That thing was received very icily, because it's got a lot of issues, right? And it's something that had been in the pipeline for quite a while, and even GMT is not immune from this. I think, on average, if we were to go in, let me start this with the musical analogy. So there's lots of people, me included, who will say things like, the music was so much better back in whatever, pick a decade, right? The 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 50s, whatever it was. All right. And to some extent, it's what you grew up listening to. But you don't remember the shit that came out in that period. You remember the good stuff. And if you remember the shit, you only remember it when you happen to hear some crap ass song, right? I am a firm believer in Sturgeon's Law, but Wargames kind of challenged that, because Sturgeon's Law says that, well, 90% of everything is crap, and that's always true. It doesn't matter what set or subset of whatever that you're looking at. 90% of it is crap, right? But I think we're doing better than that nowadays with Wargames, right? How did I set that up? Interesting. I can't figure out my own counter organization. That's just magnificent. So, Fucko, thanks for stopping by. The legend himself finally arrives. This is a good point. I'm a huge, so it's not just Compass, right? Decision's bringing back some old stuff. I mean, they always have, but with varying degrees of fidelity, obviously. But Decision has brought back a fair amount of old stuff. Compass has brought back a lot, and in fact, it's kind of become a bit of a signature thing for Compass. But GMT has brought some stuff back too, and for that matter, there might even be. I'm trying to think of an example here that is actually valid. There might even be some examples from MMP. Jeff Bueller says Panzerblitz had great graphics by even today's standards. I don't know about that. I will say that if you've got like a copy of Panzerblitz that has good counter registration, I think the counters are it just purely in terms of graphics. I actually do think the counters hold up pretty well. It's in terms of like the physical quality of the cardboard used and the quality of the die cutting that I think, if you're talking about Avalon Hill's edition of Panzerblitz anyway, that I think Avalon Hill was generally not awesome at. I feel like the rule books were usually decent in terms of graphics, but a lot of their other stuff not so much. They were owned by their own printer, so bear that in mind. Poop. All right, well, I figured out where these go, so that's cool. Do I have... Nope. Yeah, we'll have to deal with it later. That's fine. Russian campaign, right? There's more than 5 editions of this thing. There's been 1 million editions of this. Panzer Command. I've never really looked closely at Panzer Command in terms of physical component quality, I have to tell you. It's a super influential game, though. And quite a brilliant innovation by Eric Lee Smith, I would say. Eric Goebel is playing SPI's ETO now. So you're playing that one of the SPI versions or one of the TSR versions? Because there's like 4 different versions, plus the Decision one, I guess. So I'd be curious. I like the War, Compass's The War, Ernie Copley's game. I think it's pretty good. All right, we're going to try and get caught up here. We are roughly 10 minutes behind. Keith Powell, thanks for stopping by. Summer of 74 was a sweet pot. Old SPI, ABPA baseball, and FM radio. There you go. I think that this map holds up remarkably. I think a fair number, not all necessarily, I think a fair number of late period SPI maps hold up pretty favorably even today. And this is one of them. This is a very attractive map. Admittedly, they had high quality stuff to work with too. So there we go. Most people hated We the People, right? It was an alien idea. Oh, what's this crazy thing with the cards and stuff like that? We can't have that in our Hex Encounter war games, can we? Now, point-to-point games had existed prior to that. What's the first point-to-point war game? I'm not sure. However, SPI did several. Tito was point-to-point. Empress of the Middle Ages was point-to-point. And I don't think either of those were the first point-to-point war game. Rob John, this is true too, right? We've got these time-worn topics that we've seen a lot of. Some older games just have nothing. And I agree with this here, but a lot of, let's say, what would be a good, so let's say Worthington Publishing. This is not something Worthington would do, but I'm using them as an example, and I think you'll see why. Let's say Worthington was to announce, hey, we're redoing Flat Top, and what we would get is a faithful recreation of the original Flat Top. I think that would absolutely fall over like a lead balloon in today's environment, right? I think Flat Top, and I love Flat Top. I think Flat Top is my favorite Avalon Hill game these days. I'm not sure, it certainly wasn't back in the day because I didn't play it until the 2010s, I think. But I think people would just say, oh, what's with all this paperwork and stuff like that? Nowadays, if you were to reimagine Flat Top, what you would have is some very streamlined thing that was unrecognizable, or you would have a game with an app that assisted you in playing it, which is not a bad idea, but it's a completely different experience than Flat Top. When Stigler here is going to be talking about Panzer Group Guderian, and I think this is true. I think people didn't quite appreciate just how influential that was going to be, but people did know that it was something special. I agree with that. So Jeff Beeler mentions The Legend Begins to North Africa 41. So what we're talking about here, for those who don't know, they're both Mark Simonich games, and North Africa 41 is basically a reimagining of The Legend Begins, Mark's earlier, like much earlier, Rhino games, I think, North Africa game. Yes, but I think this is a little bit of an unfair comparison, right? I'd say Mark Simonich is one of the top designers designing war games nowadays, right? And undoubtedly, if we asked Mark, I'm guessing, Mark, feel free to come on the show and correct me if you're not happy with this statement, that Mark would say that he's learned a lot since he made The Legend Begins back in whenever that was, the early 90s maybe, and that he has a clear idea of what he wants to do with that system, right? So, people learn. It's actually it's simultaneously a bad example and a really interesting example because it's the same designer redoing his own game from back in the day. Now, Joseph Syverson is talking about the older style of wargame and preferring that, and I am very sympathetic to this. Which I think ought to be relatively obvious to anybody that watches this show all the time, right? So, folks, if you're new here, thanks for coming by, and remember to like the video, thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And there's a bunch of links in the video description if you'd like to support the show. In the spirit of supporting the show, the official sponsor of the Counterclipping Show are our good friends at Noble Knight Games. So while I try and catch up with the chat and fumble with the buttons here, I would like to thank Noble Knight and give it over to them for a brief message. So take it away, Noble Knight.
Here at Noble Knight Games, we've been carefully growing the world's largest selection of board games, role-playing games and dice, war games, miniatures and paints, card games, and more. Going on 25 years now. Our rustic castle contains more game and hobby goodness than you can shake a stick at. Complete with careful packaging and the finest customer service the land can provide. You can buy, sell, trade from anywhere in the world. Just like nature intended. Noble Knight Games.
All right. Once again, thanks, Noble Knight, the official sponsor of the Counterclipping Show. So, a couple of things here that I want to riff on. So Vince Ree is talking about. So I think we have to acknowledge the superiority of modern graphic systems. But at the same time, that's not really what I'm trying to get after in the show here. I'm kind of trying to get after if we feel that, other than the fact that you might just have a preference, and that's perfectly fine. If you do, however, what's at the root of that preference for your preference for older games? What is it about the older games other than nostalgia, which again is completely valid? What about those older games makes them more interesting to you? That's actually what I'm kind of trying to get at here. Scott Bell mentions our eyes were younger back then and could handle tiny print. That's definitely true for me. I can tell you that. David Imperato says, and I think this is true of a lot of design, certainly new designers, right, that start saying, you know what, I'm not quite happy with, I like this game, but I'm really not quite happy with it. I think I could do it better. And they end up doing their own thing. And over the course of development and all that, sometimes that looks radically different from the original game. Molotov Cockatiel Games, who is a younger wargamer, so one of the drivers on this, though, is the way the ratings on BGG work, because there's some kind of weight thing that is dependent on how many ratings there are. And some of these older games may have either a lot of ratings or relatively few ratings, depending on what it is. So Stigler's talking about laser die cutting. I think almost nobody is actually using laser die cutting. And if they are, it's using some kind of much cleaner method than they used to use. Because you remember the old Victory Point games that came with laser cut counters where they included a towelette to wipe the soot off the counters? That sucks. I suspect that Blue Panther is using some kind of laser cutting technology, but if they are, they're using a material that doesn't leave that sooty residue, which I really hated in the smell, and I don't like any of that. So, all right. So we did get, the War of the Ring we're talking about is going to be the SPI War of the Ring. It's designed by, as I recall, Howie Barish and Richard Berg. This can totally happen, right? There have been a couple of things from VUCA, for example, that have been praised to high heaven for their amazing graphical fidelity and component quality, and yet the games themselves released with a significant amount of errata. I think that is a thing that we should be aware of. I mean, it's great that it looks nice, but if there's problems in the game, then we should have addressed that too. But as Mark points out, design is design, and there's also no comparison between the old style printings with the paste pots and hot wax and shit like that, and the new modern facilities for doing your layouts and the printing itself. Right? Real early SPI stuff was pretty rough, right? You remember the white? I mean, I don't remember the white boxes. I've seen the white boxes because when they stopped using the white boxes, I think I was about 3. So I only remember the black plastic flat trays. But if you remember the white flats, there were a couple different versions of those that they released stuff in for the first few years of SPI's existence. And those are fairly rough, right? Some of the SPI, even some of the early stuff, something like, what's a good example? The Wilderness Campaign. I looked at that with an eye toward maybe thinking about picking up a copy because it's an interesting topic. Man, it looks primitive. It looks super primitive. That's like 72, 73, something like that. In general, the GBACW, I have all of them now. And I haven't played any of them yet, so bear that in mind. It's a much simpler system than the modern iteration from GMT. Most of these games are relatively late period SPI, and so graphically they tend to be fairly nice by the standards of the era, right? I mean, this is, Stigler's right here, of course, but this isn't just BGG either, right? I mean, take everybody's opinion of whatever with a grain of salt, right? One of the irritating things happening here is that they screwed the Union ironclads up. It's pretty annoying. In that they don't have the ironclad symbols. They just have the regular boat symbols on them, and you got to figure out which ones are the ironclads by what the factors are. It really kind of sucks. That, by the way, is a piece of errata from the original. That's not, well, it is Decision's fault. it's a piece, an error that they made in the original printing that Decision did not correct in their printing, which is potentially even more baffling, to be completely honest about it. All right, this is depots. We got all these depot pieces, and I feel like I'm missing some stuff. Probably, what that probably means is that I have mixed up the 10s and the 1s on the depots. Oh, well. We'll figure it out. It's gonna be fine. I'm sure there's nothing missing. Oh, yeah, the turret counters, too. Very, very, very cluttered. Well, I mean, so... fundamentally, if you got different kinds of pieces that we see in Wargames. You've got counters, obviously. You've got maybe pawns or cubes or maybe meeple. This is all board games, right? Meeples or whatever, right? So the piece, the game piece represents something. And the question that whoever's doing the game needs to ask is, well, okay, so how much information do I need to put on this thing, right? Maybe the only piece of information I need is to say, here is a given color piece in this location on the board. In which case, using little black plastic cubes makes perfect sense. There's war games that do that. There's non-war games that do that. The blocks are something like a block war game, a Columbia-style block war game where there's hidden information on one side. That is a thing I've never seen out of war games. I'm happy to take suggestions, but I don't play that many Euros or whatever. So maybe that is a mechanic that's been used somewhere, but I'm not aware of it outside of war games. Lots of games, including Euros and Ameritrash games or whatever, use counters, right? One way or the other. A lot of them come with miniatures too, but the miniature will, the piece, the point I'm trying to get at is that the piece is conveying information, right? And it should be designed with that in mind. How much information do I need to provide with this piece? Is it just a color and or a location? I can get away with little cubes. Do I need to differentiate between different types of forces? Okay, then maybe I need I need a different kind of piece than that. Maybe I'll use blocks. Maybe I'll use miniatures where you have different miniatures showing different kinds of units. All that's possible. I'm not sure I got caught up even a bit. So the point is that the design of the piece should be informed by the amount of information that is going to need to be on the piece. SPI was not always a paper map. Off the top of my head, this edition of Star Force, not all of them, but this edition of Star Force and Russian Civil War have mounted maps. The Power Politics series all had mounted maps, and a few other odds and ends had mounted maps as well. And generally, I have not had a lot of SPI mounted maps pass through my hands. But generally speaking, I've been reasonably pleased with the quality of the mounted maps that I saw out of SPI. Unlike, say, 3W, whose mounted maps were a crime against maps, to say the least. Absolute shite. Those 3W mounted maps. And the game I'm specifically thinking of is Mr. Lincoln's War. Those were just absolutely horrific. These are, I think they're nice too. Remember though, late period SPI, right? The late period SPI maps, I think tended to look pretty good. Not universally necessarily. I mean, you look at Sorcerer, for example, which I've also got over, where the hell is it? On the top shelf. And that's got a very, let's say, an interesting map. Take a look at it on BGG if you get the chance, and you might need a barf bag. It's just a really intense mixture of colors. Jeff Beeler, thanks so much for the support. Much appreciated. How old is older depends on who you ask, right? I as a youngster, am happy to say anything that is later, that's earlier than like 1990 is older. But I do think that there's a significant transition around 1990, say, but it's hard to pin it down exactly, right? But in the period between, say, 1988 and 1992. I think there is a transition that I think probably nobody noticed at the time. At this time, you start seeing the Gamers and GMT and a number of other publishers that are still around in some form or another, right? We start to see a greater reliance on series games. I think we have a greater reliance on series games now than we had back in the day. We had series games back in the 70s, right? The knee-jerk thing to say, to credit Dean for Dean did popularize the series wargame approach, but he didn't come up with it, right? I mean, Great Battles of the American Civil War did that. Central Front did that. There's at least 2 or 3 different SPI sequences of games that did a series game exactly as we would recognize it today, where you have a series rule book and game-specific rules, and here's the stuff for the specific game. This is fair, right? Before you were born, it makes it old. Before you were born, makes it ancient. If it happened when you were a child, it makes it old. And if it happened anytime after that, it just happened. Well, you're preaching to the choir here, Captain Nolan. I don't know what to say. 60s, I don't know. Maybe. I'm certainly a fan of a bunch of stuff that happened in the 60s. But I'm also a big fan of some stuff that happened in the 70s. So there are good things coming out now, but I don't listen to the stuff that's coming out now. So unless I stumble across some, every once in a while, I will that'll happen. I'll stumble across something and say, hey, this is really good. I like this. I'll go and I'll run it down on Spotify. Otherwise, I might never know. Right. David Thompson, thanks for stopping by. Hopefully you're doing okay. Everything's doing okay over there in sunny Southern Ohio. So Chad Kennedy mentions, I mean, yeah, but I don't think there's much of I don't think anybody has ever really tried to replicate what GDW tried to do and did not succeed with Europa, which is to provide the entire World War II in Europe at 16 miles to the hex on a nominally division scale. And I say nominally because the division scale in Europa is not division scale. There's a quarter of the units on the map will be divisions. So, well, if you go with the earlier ones, it is slightly better ratio than that. But there's a lot of subdivision sized units. I would say that Europa has a variable unit scale that floats between divisions and battalions. That's how I would define that. And you would define OCS as having a very similar scale. And I've mentioned OCS in the context of Europa's influence on it before, but I don't think that the goal was to replicate the Europa project. I do think that one of the goals behind OCS was to kind of do that right? And a huge portion of that turned out to be rescaling the thing. All right. This is not a great methodology, in my opinion. Let me put it that way. The lawn is, in fact, in my zone of control. So there you go. One of the locals down in Central Ohio is who he's referring to in this case. They have just recently started Valley of Tears. I mean, good luck with this. They've expressed no desire or interest in selling it off, even though they clearly have no idea what they're doing, and I would be stunned if they ever released another product. Aaron Danis is probably referring to GW's Third World War. Maybe that's what. Well, I don't think that's really a good comparison either. But yeah, I know Compass did a great job with Third World War. All right, Perfidious Albion. So, I mean, remember, it's just the color. I don't know a lot about this, right? I'm not a graphics guy. I'm not a printing guy. However, that said, they had the 4-color process back then. That's what they used to print comic books, and they suffered under the same limitations back in the 60s and 70s, right? So I do think that the Panzerblitz counters, if you like get ones that are registered correctly, they actually do look quite good, especially considering how early that is. Mike Reed mentions the paradox, if you will, of living rules. There are people who aggressively dislike living rules. They hate that the game designer is making changes to the game, no matter how minor or trivial. They want absolute stability, and I can understand the desire to have stability. But at the same time, if it does make the game better, then I'm all for living rules. In cases where it maybe doesn't make the game better, then that's a different question. And one can think of examples where that has happened. Some people would call A World at War one of those examples where every time they discover a new edge case that comes out in tournament play, Bruce writes a rule for it. It might not be a rule that you ever see in play, but there'll be a rule for it, right? I don't have a better, I mean, I don't think so, but I don't have a better theory than this. Panzerblitz also had it's interesting. You know what? A box cover art would actually be a halfway decent show topic. But Panzerblitz, Squad Leader, Panzer Leader, these are all not only iconic covers, but great covers that hold up today. If somebody released, there's only one Roger McGowan, right? And all three of those are Roger covers. And I don't think that there's anybody operating in that style, but if somebody was, I think that would absolutely jump off the shelf into people's faces. John C. from the sunny Philippines. Thanks for stopping by. And don't worry, John, I am late in acknowledging your presence when you popped in like 25 minutes ago. So, all right, Brant, thanks for stopping by. Well, we're exploring what we mean by better. That's the topic, right? So maybe Mark wants to weigh in on this. I do feel like the Hell's Highway counters are the worst counters I have ever seen in any war game. I didn't think this didn't smell. I don't know. I have no information about this. Didn't smell like printer mistake. This smelled overcompensating on the gutters on the counter so that they didn't have to worry about misregistration. That's something that we saw a lot of in SPI counters in certain periods, and certainly in some Victory Games counters. Some Victory Games counters didn't suffer from this at all. But that's my impression, and it's just really hard to read them. I mean, that's the problem. Even back in the day when I had better eyes, I'd probably still have a problem with that. There are Europa counters, thankfully not a lot of them, that are black counters with dark red print on them. That is bullshit. Nobody should do that. So, Civil War by Victory Games. I don't like the leaders. The manpower counters and all the markers are actually fine. I don't like the leaders. I think the graphical depiction of the leaders is suboptimal. I think they're hard to read. And generally, it's pretty small. The War Between the States map is very nice. I like the War Between the States map very much. But I like both of them. I like the old Redmond Simonson one from 78 or whatever it was. And I like the Decision one, which I believe is a Joe. I'm not positive. It might be a Joe Youst map. I like them both. The Decision map, however, lacks the enormous primeval forest that fills up the entire state of Kansas. For no obvious reason. Berlin D5 is pretty nice too, actually. And again, late period SPI. And there's no question this is a classic, absolutely seminal war game. I don't think it would be. It's a much. I'm trying to think of how to put this that will encapsulate how I actually feel about it, because I have talked about this before, and as you know, it's sort of spiritual successor in the U.S. Civil War from GMT. I think nowadays, it's too detailed to really gel with modern audiences. But for people looking for a throwback experience, it's a classic game. It's a fantastic game. And I have nothing to say about it. Everything I just said is really a statement about how I think the market has developed nowadays. I don't think it would be as popular a game as it was back in the day. Let me put it that way. If somebody redid it now, not necessarily redid it, because if you redid the old game, I'm taking what if this Victory Games Civil War came out today? I think it would be considered overcomplicated. If somebody redid it, that's a different story, and that's a kind of occupying a different niche within the market. So, Storm over Arnhem is an area movement map. So, I mean, I have made the statement in a number of occasions that topologically there is no difference between a point-to-point map and an area map, but there is a visual difference, right? And certainly, I don't think that Storm over Arnhem pioneered this either. I can think of examples of area movement games that predated this. So I would say it's an early one, but I don't think it's the first. Let me put it that way. Sorry about that, folks. Let me know if you have any audio problems. The computer crashed on me. That is unfortunate, but we're going to try and get everything back up and running here. Welcome to technology. Yay. All right, there we go. So sorry about that. Anyway. So, did I see Mo's game table is here? He probably showed up like half an hour ago, and I just missed everything. Yes, I don't know who's mad at me right now. I forget who's mad at me right now. Mark, thanks for stopping by. So there is a Nevsky update kit. Imperial Struggle had some, I mean, this is true, right? I'm not sure how comprehensive the Nevsky update kit is. Imperial Struggle had some significant errata. Caesar Rome versus Gaul, I have no idea. Mr. President had some decent errata. I think this problem was overstated in the case of Mr. President, but it's such a big game that it does have the amount of errata is not zero. We will be talking about this in earnest after Origins. So, Mark Hodgkinson, you know what? I'm going to disagree with me here, Mark. I don't think Empires in Arms is a war game. I think it is a Napoleonic skinned cosmic encounter. That's what I think of Empires in Arms. Now, I say that not having played it, but I do own it and have looked at it. And we've actually noodled with, we played like part of a turn at a couple of Winterfests ago, and it's a neat looking game. I don't think, I mean, I'm hard pressed to compare that with something like Panzer Blitz, right? So, and I've said that before, and that's admittedly a bit of a hot take. You know what I'm saying? Oh, nice. Atlantic Sentinels is one I was looking forward to, and I haven't had the chance to go. I had a report from a buddy who went to Compass Expo this past weekend, actually, in Meriden, Connecticut. And apparently they pulled like 80 or 90 people. Congrats to Brittany, who works for Compass, who had her baby and was showing it off like a tiny meeple. at the convention, which I thought was amazing. By the way, I saw pictures of that. Mo, about €1? What's that? Oh my goodness. Mr. President's not a euro. It's not a war game, but it's not a euro. It's very much its own thing. It does not fit neatly into existing categories. And that's fine, right? I would not describe, and I don't think anybody anywhere described Mr. President as a war game. There's war in it, but it's super duper abstract, and it's not what the game's about, right? It is a thing that you have to deal with, but the game is about dealing with all of the different crises that might come up for a presidency, rather than just with the wars. So it is, this is actually pretty good. I think I described it as a Josiah Bartlett simulator, actually, which I felt like was appropriate, not only because of what Mike's saying, but because it does represent a certain idealized picture of what we feel the president does, and that picture aligns pretty closely with the picture of what the president does that you saw in the West Wing. So, that would be awesome, wouldn't it? So it is possible that I missed some stuff while I was away here. So sorry about that. So no, it wasn't the internet. If that happens, it's usually the computer taking a dump. I just need to probably reboot it more often. I did reboot it today. So Mike Berticelli's here. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for stopping by. I am sort of sympathetic to this, and also somewhat sympathetic to all games should have half-inch counters, and that's that. But there's a certain amount of masochism involved in that statement, because I, like everybody else in our age bracket, is having at this point problems seeing the tiniest print on half-inch counters. So it is generally desirable to have larger counters, but this economy of scale of how much stuff goes in the game is a factor too, right? And I tend to play bigger games, so I tend to have to deal with smaller counters a lot of the time. So do I have yes, I do. I don't actually need to be done clipping here. I just didn't have any counters in front of me. So the errata now, well, yeah, but those are the entire. That's not the errata. That's 200 pages. It's the whole kit, right? Which includes reprints of all the books. There is, however, a substantial amount of errata in it. The counters, I don't think there's that many counters. There's a couple of misprinted counters that I felt were not super duper major, and the update kit will include a couple of extra counters that they didn't think to put in, despite the 10-year development cycle that the game was in. All right. No, not really, but another one. There's two other Azure Wish games that are on my radar, and one that I can tell you a little bit about. The one I can tell you a little bit about is Europa Universalis, because it was eventually adapted into a computer game by the same designers. That computer game is now in its 4th version or edition or whatever we're calling it, as Europa Universalis 4 from Paradox Studios or Paradox, whatever Paradox is called. You can get it through Steam. It's on sale all the time, so don't pay full price for it. It's very good. I suck at it. The two that are on my radar, however, other than Le Grand de Guerre, which I now have, thank you. You know who you are. The two that are on my radar are La Révolution Française, which is a game about the French Revolution. There's shockingly few games about the French Revolution. There's not zero, but there's not that many either, and that's irritating. And Russia 1917, which is a game about an operational level game about the Russian Civil War. Those are those are pretty interesting looking, and those we might end up doing a Noble Knight campaign for one or both of those. We'll see. Well, there are scandals. Everything is just kind of generic in Mr. President in a sense, and that there could be a scandal, but there's no Monica Lewinsky card, right? So, all right. So thank you, John Stanley, for the support. As always, it is much appreciated. Variant on Mr. President is set in 1919 after Wilson's major stroke. This is interesting. And I could easily see expansions for like historical expansion kits for Mr. President that say, okay, you're not just Mr. President, you're Herbert Hoover or you're Abraham Lincoln. Maybe Lincoln's a bad example because that would like add an entire game. But I could actually totally see that. My idea, which I actually got as far as taking some notes on, was Mr. Imperator, where you are not the president, you are Domitian, the Roman Emperor Domitian, who was not amongst the most popular of the Roman emperors. And I felt it's an interesting period. I think you could totally do that. And then I remembered that I do have Rome Inc., which does kind of do the same thing for the Roman Empire, but not nearly in the same level of detail that Mr. President does for the American presidency. Azure Wishes Hispania. Yeah, this is actually somewhat interesting too, but it is not officially hit my radar. I will say that Battle Lines La Viva España actually looks pretty intriguing, and I might run that down. That's Stigler. I'm not even going to highlight that comment. That's just gross, and I don't want to deal with it. So, I at one point had I track as you are aware because I'm an insane person. I track all my games that come in via Excel, and I do put in the release dates. So I could actually produce an infographic about what years I am peaking in. Over the last couple of years, I've picked up rather a lot of SPI and Avalon Hill stuff. SPI is now number 2 publisher in my library. So this would be hilarious, actually. Not this time, punk. So, would I say Immersion is better with newer games? No, I would not. Not generally speaking. There might be specific games with high immersion that we could name, but I don't feel like I am more immersed in a recent game versus a game that came out in the 70s. I will say that this is a completely different axis, okay? But I will say that I feel like I am much more immersed in a game where the designer has something to say rather than a sort of generic war game, right? And somebody new, like a youngster like Molotov Cockatiel here, might pick up like an old SPI game and feel like it feels very bland because it might be a topic that's been dealt with a million times, simulated using mechanics that they've seen a lot of. Somebody who without the context of having seen at least some of that action back in the day might read a lot of those older games as being very bland and therefore not immersive. And some of them just are going to be that way, right? I mean, not every game is going to be a success or hold up after 50 or 70 years or whatever it is. What do we mean by immersive? I mean, I guess I should have asked that question. I have a sense of what it means to be immersive that's going to be different from a lot of wargamers. I will give you that caveat. And that comes from a background that for a long time was dominated not by war games, but by tabletop role-playing games. Furthermore, I have a sense of what immersive means that's based on video games to some extent, too. What makes a video game immersive is not at all the same thing about what makes a war game immersive. I'm not sure that immersion is something that war game designers are generally actively considering, although it's certainly something that can emerge from the game. Now, well, yeah, that's true. You're not that much younger than me. You're a little bit younger than me. Not too much, but a little bit. I think you're about 10 or 15 years younger than me, actually, thinking about it. I don't know. Maybe you're just well preserved. On the other hand, as Stacking Limit mentions here, one thing that I think we might correlate with immersion for war games might be that commander decision space. How clearly do you kind of put yourself into the shoes of the historical commander? And in this sense, I think that at least some modern games, I don't know that this is true. I think at least some modern games might be doing a better job at this than older games. Maybe. The specific example I'm thinking of is BCS, because I feel like BCS does an amazing job of really putting my head into the headspace of the commanders there on the spot, right? Other than that, I'm not sure what we would actually what feature we would correlate with immersion in a war game, right? Cross LARPing with wargaming, and you get, John, you'll get to see this at Origins this year. You'll get the Kriegspiel, and or the command post exercise. So believe it or as goofy as this sounds as an idea, there are 100% things that do this. Kriegspiels, command post exercises that the Armchair Dragoons do. This is all be on display at Origins, or the National Security Decision-Making game, which I've done once, and I'd wanted to do it for years, but it was always like this 8-hour commitment where you were like eating the entire day to do it, and I never wanted to do that until they started introducing 4-hour events, in which case I hopped into that, and it was tremendous fun, and I walked out thinking, this is a LARP for wargamers. And that's also true of Kriegspiels, right? Depending on how much walking around you do. So I would think this is an interesting observation. Circus Maximus, Avalon Hill Dune, and Diplomacy. I think you could. So there's also a thing that some wargamers do with some games, which I will blithely call role-playing, okay? Where it's not required by the game, but it adds to everybody's fun. So, for example, you might joke, if you are playing the Soviets in a game, that the commander in charge of that terrible die roll that you just made will be taken out back and shot. Or the Germans, because they did that too. So you can do that kind of light pseudo role playing in a war game, and it can add to the experience. And one might say that could be a feature of you could describe that as immersion too, but that's never in the, well, I don't want to say never, but that's almost never in the game. There are examples where it is. Republic of Rome is the classic example, where if you're like about to conduct a vote on some important thing, you are encouraged to stand up and give a speech. And you were encouraged to negotiate with the other players in character, and that's very interesting. And this game, War Between the States, has some actually interesting little asides, where when you do certain things, you are told explicitly by the rules to do them in a somewhat theatrical way, which I found very interesting, considering when the game came out, what was going on in 1978. Now, this is also, of course, true, and we've touched on this topic before, is war game players tend to have this omniscient or nigh omniscient viewpoint where they've just got way more information than anybody historically would have on the ground, right? So, I haven't played this. This might be one of the. Ooh, that's a good call, actually. This might be one of those games that I would characterize as a difficult game. Not that the game itself would be difficult, but it is about a difficult topic that may have as a design goal the players are going to be uncomfortable, right? This is something that Amabel Holland talks about. She's done several games that basically do exactly that are designed to make you uncomfortable. What's it called? God damn it. This Guilty Land is designed to make you feel uncomfortable. And it is a really fascinating game. Other games in this category might include something like John Company, or even Pax Pamir. Although I felt distanced enough from the subject matter in Pax Pamir that I didn't really read Pax Pamir that way. I have played it once. It was very interesting. I would probably play it again. I would like to play John Company. Mean Joe Green is here. Says this immersive Status Pro Baseball or any of the other analog baseball simulators. I could totally see this. You can kind of put yourself in the shoes of the general manager or the coach. or the field manager, I could totally see this as being quite immersive. You could create these elaborate fantasy leagues, which we did back in the day when we played Status Pro Football. I played Status Pro Football. The only games like this I've ever played are Status Pro Baseball and Status Pro Football. I may have had Status Pro Basketball, but I don't remember ever playing it. And I had fun with those at the time. And I created this elaborate league chart, and then we had this draft where you drafted the cards of the different players and stuff, and the teams were all completely fictional. And I thought that was, I had tremendous fun. I guess this, it's how big a dork I am. I had tremendous fun just like drawing up this big chart of this phony league. This is a good call. There's a whole pile of these from Hollandspiel specifically. Puerto Rico. I feel like I've never played Puerto Rico. I can't comment on Puerto Rico. I know that it has been objected to on grounds along these lines. I don't know enough about it to intelligently comment on it, so I won't. All right, Conquistador. Yeah, but the game's not really leading you down this path, and it is a very there's a particular word here that I'm intentionally not using. Conquistador, and I like Conquistador. I think it's a good game, and I went out and got it again because it's a game I remembered very fondly. But it is also a game that treats the history in a really cavalier way. And that is something that is quite common on games on that or related topics. And I would prefer not to, there's nothing wrong with liking that game, but you also should acknowledge it where it has historical weaknesses, right? So, this sounds like a cool idea. John, this sounds an awful lot like a Kriegspiel. Since your guys are going to be there anyway, I'm going to strongly recommend that you and Todd participate in either the Kriegspiel or command post exercise. I think you will find it very interesting. The computer game does too, for that matter. Now, I've never played or really seriously looked at the original Europa Universalis because by the time I was even aware of it, it was already a computer game. I was introduced to a computer game, the computer Europa Universalis with, I think, EU2, I believe. And I didn't play much of it until EU3, and I played more EU4 than that, and I still suck at it. So it's really neat, and it's one of those things where it's a character building exercise for wargamers, right? I don't care if you don't enjoy it. You will gain insights from participating in it. You don't have to do it again if you hated it. That's fine. But every wargamer should do it at least once, in my opinion. All right. That is everything for War Between the States, except for the markers and I suppose the variant leaders, which I don't care too much about. Oops, we don't need a thing there. I like this game a lot too. Actually, are we talking the new one or the original? I think he might have done both. I do have the new one, Europa Universalis: The Price of Power, and I think it's a pretty strong game. It is also kind of difficult in the sense of it's the tempo is really kind of slow, that to an extent that I think is undesirable and it's kind of a monster game. It'll kind of take you a whole week at a convention to play, right? So, and I think that's a problem. The original As Your Wish version. Okay, then I have watched parts of that. It's an interesting game, but it's got a lot of moving pieces, and it is probably better as a video game, right? You could argue that the Price of Power is better as a video game too. I'm not sure that that's true or that I would agree with that, but because I would rather play Europa Universalis: The Price of Power than EU4. Somebody mentioned that EU5 is on the way. Warren Brune, thanks. Welcome back to the show. Mentions Gunslinger. I presume we're talking about Avalon Hill's Gunslinger here. That's another one that I never played. It's got a really great box cover and looks interesting and fun in a Western shoot 'em up kind of way. I could totally see playing that at a convention, say. And it's one that I will probably grab at some point when I see it for a price that I would like to pay. So I think there's a Vassal module for it now, and it is not close. I would strongly prefer to play that particular game on Vassal as opposed to playing it on Tabletop Simulator, because I don't like Tabletop Simulator. Tabletop Simulator is good at lots of different kinds of games, but those tend not to be the kinds of games that I personally would like to play. So, GW Civil War. Yeah, but I think this was 82, 83. Am I wrong about that? I could be wrong about that. That's totally possible. Which would have come out after the 1981 date given earlier for Storm over Arnhem. But I can tell you that, all right, let's look. This is hard to do because probably a couple of the point-to-point games that I've got from SPI are magazine games like Tito, for example, which wasn't released in a box, but wasn't considered a classic at the time. 0 of these are point-to-point games. That I can tell. That's not true. Freedom in the Galaxy is functionally a point-to-point game, as is Sword in the Stars, as was the game it was based on, Empires of the Middle Ages. John Carter is a hybrid. It's got a bunch of different things going on. I don't think it's easy to figure that out. Star Force, Battlefleet Mars are on hex grids. Sorcerer is on a hex grid. War of the Ring is on a hex grid. So that's very little that I've got anyway. But at least there's a couple examples. So Eric Goebel, thanks for stopping by. This is interesting. Eric Schaefer says he's played 2 games of the original EU, and it feels similar to Empires in Arms, but adds the economics and technology of the period. I mean, that to me is fairly interesting. I like sort of civ building games, right? But generally, there are at least a couple exceptions. I would prefer to play those kind of games on a computer, right? But I'm happy to give Empires of the Middle Ages a try. It's another one of these things with it's mid-period decision games with the center nibs, and it's going to be a bitch. I started punching it, but because the counters all need to be sliced out of the sheets, it just takes forever. So that's irritating. Area movement, wow, good call. War at Sea and Victory in the Pacific. Those are both mid-70s, 77, if we call that mid-70s. So those would predate Storm over Arnhem as well. And those are definitely area movement. And they were quite popular, too. At least Victory in the Pacific. Victory in the Pacific is a terrific game. I do think it takes long, like a lot of Avalon Hill games of the period, it takes longer to play than it really ought to. But other than that, I think it's quite a strong game and holds up pretty well. Radio Commander. Oh, that's actually great. Here's another LARP for wargamers, by the way. Captain Sonar. Play it at a convention. Boy, I hope you're in a room where a lot of noise will be tolerated, because you're going to make a lot of noise playing Captain Sonar. It is tremendous fun. Highly, 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 highly recommended. So, but it is very much one of those LARP for wargamers. It's almost not a LARP for wargamers. It's almost like a party game for wargamers, actually. Tremendous fun. Much better than U-Boat. U-Boat, not. You notice nobody's talking about U-Boat anymore, by the way. Risk is sort of point to point. No, it's an area movement game, but it's topologically no different than point to point, right? I've been making this point for years. It can even be topologically equivalent to a hex map, but only if every area or point always leads to 6 and only 6 other points. So this kind of built into, if we're talking about Captain Sonar, it's kind of built in for that. So yes, I fully endorse. I'm not a big let's drink while we play type of guy. I don't like that because honestly, it tends to make me sleepy more than anything else. And that to me, that's not a great time. This is one of the games where I feel like you should be flexible with that particular rule. It's not just more of a war game. I don't think it's more of a war game necessarily than U-Boat. It's a better fucking game than U-Boat, in my opinion. I mean, you can. I could play this sober because I'm really fucking loud. Okay, really loud. So now I could sort of see this too, but you better warm everybody up by watching Ben-Hur first. Or at least make sure that everybody involved has at least seen it somewhat recently. Yeah, I heartily recommend Captain Sonar. It is just tremendous fun. Yeah, I don't have enough experience with U-boat to contradict Mike here. I'm balking at the term simulator. I don't think it's much of a simulator, but that's not to say that U-boat is a bad game. That's just, my impression. So, and U-boat does a lot of folks felt pretty salty about U-boat 2 a few years ago for reasons that I don't feel we need to go into. So there's that. Loosely, okay, I'll take that. I'll take a loose simulator, a loose and rattly simulator, I suppose. So, I feel like, as Mark Herman said when he was here, design is design, right? So we should be able to judge the design standards, not the graphical standards, because that's to some extent an apples and oranges type of thing, right? The technology is just so vastly different now than it was. Is this the same game? I was not aware that this was even the same game. So there was an app assist thing that you had to do. So I'm concerned about the app assist thing. For exactly basically the reason Mo points out here is, well, what if the app breaks and they don't support it anymore because the board game's out of print, so why should they? I think that's a problem. I own one game that is an app-supported game, The Search for Planet X, which actually is a lot of fun. It's basically a logic deduction game. You're searching for Planet X and trying to figure out where it is based on clues that the app gives you. It's actually pretty fun, but this is totally a concern. I'm leery of app-assisted games for this reason, to be honest. This is true, well, most being the key word here, but this is true of a lot of games with area maps. As I recall, most areas on the area map in Hearts of Iron 3 connect to 6 other areas, as I recall. And that's a marvelous game. I liked it a lot better than I liked Hearts of Iron 4. I mean, there's games practically like this, Stigler. There's Microsoft Flight Simulator is a super duper hardcore flight and simulator games. I balk at installing apps on my phone. I balk at it. So this is actually somewhat true too. Which Sudoku is also a logic puzzle. It's just a mathier logic puzzle than Planet X necessarily is. We need some water. I had this weird thing happen today where I was on the phone with Noble Knight, actually, and my voice just disappeared. It was like a temporary bout of laryngitis where suddenly I was just like, and I'm like, I don't know what the hell it was. It went away as soon as I went in the house and drank some water, and my voice just like poof went away. So I imagine this is true, but this sounds an awful lot like a job, and they're not paying me to play these games. So no thanks. I mean, even something like Elite Dangerous has a substantial learning curve too, and that's a spaceflight sim that I have played a decent amount of, and I'm also not very good at. I mean, I didn't get in a lot of dog fights in Elite Dangerous either, though. I was mostly exploring and running cargo and stuff like that. Remember back in the day when you used to get a fat rule book. I believe the rule book for Gary Grigsby's War in the East 2 is multiple hundreds of pages as well, but it's not a physical book anymore because nobody does that. It's a PDF that you get when you buy the game. So there's a huge manual for the shallow and unsatisfying strategic command World War II as well, though. So just because it's got a big manual doesn't mean anything. So I do still have the all the HOTAS units and all that stuff. What I might do with this room after I move the office out of it, I'll keep these Cal axes here and just use them as general whatever storage. That's fine. There's always room for general whatever storage. But these won't be here. The desk won't be here. This might be a VR room, actually. I'm not sure it's big enough, but I'm not sure it isn't. So we'll see. I've got nooks over here and over here and over here that the computer and stuff could go in. And I'd put a rug on the floor so that I knew when I'd step off the rug that I was stepping off the rug and about to walk into the wall. So that is a thing I will consider when I get this room emptied out. DCS might be the game I'm thinking of, actually. So we've got the whole thing on Lake Erie. There's like a reenactment that happens on for D-Day, and that might be happening. I might do that this year, actually, since I'm a lot closer now than I used to be. Now we're talking about, yeah, I can't see that. I can't see making a show out of that. I might talk about it. I guess the new Escape from Tarkov, is it Tarkov? I don't know. There's a big flap about some new Tarkov game that it's annoyingly monetized. So just keeping track of all the controls. I have I forget what model it is, but it's one of the higher end Logitech. Now Logitech, used to be somebody else. HOTAS rigs. It's got a million switches on the joystick and on the throttle and all that stuff. And just keeping track of what all the buttons are and what all the buttons do, especially if you're wearing a headset where you can't physically see the device, is a question you need to ask, right? I have been playing about 14 hours in, and it's taken me almost a month to do this. But I bought, about 3 weeks ago, I bought the Mass Effect Legendary Edition, and I had played through multiple times. I'd played through the first and second games, and I'd never gotten very far in the third one at all. But mostly that was because it was years between when I got them. So I started redoing the first one, and I'm about 14 hours in. It's taken me about 3 weeks to do that. It's good, still a good game. The second one's still better. The third one, I don't know. Everybody didn't like the ending, so there's that. Generally speaking, I don't have a lot of time for video games. I do have Red Orchestra, though, and that was something I did noodle with back in the day. There was also a Source Engine, like a World War II Source Engine first-person shooter, hold on, I'll tell you, because I can just pull it. I got Steam here. I can pull that up. Day of Defeat Source. It was what it was, and this thing is probably $5 normally. It is $10 normally, and if it's on sale, it does go on sale. It'll probably be no more than $5, and it was fun. I had fun with it. It's very straightforward. It's not a deep game, but it was, a fun World War II first-person shooter type of experience. Other than that, a little bit of Red Orchestra, I have not played a lot of, and one of the Medal of Honor games, the Medal of Honor D-Day game, whatever that was. Red Orchestra was the one I played, and that's East Front, so that's neat. That's kind of my jam, right? But first-person shooters are not my jam because I don't have the reflexes for it anymore. I never had the reflexes for it. Let's be honest. I've always been an oaf. So there's that, but I did have a little bit of fun with it. Probably the first-person shooter that I did the best with was Team Fortress 2, and that's just because I played the shit out of it. I haven't touched that in years. Yeah, this is bullshit. Steam says I've played it for 16 hours. I think I played it for several hundred hours prior to when Steam was giving you those numbers. And I've played a little bit of Counter-Strike too, but not very much. Counter-Strike is too full of super duper hardcore people that are super duper serious about it, and I'm not. So Same deal with Counter-Strike Source, and I've never played Counter-Strike Source, but it's the same type of thing. Or with any of like the modern Call of Duties or whatever. I'm not going to ever be good enough at that. If you talk a much looser FPS like Team Fortress 2, I could probably at least have fun with. So, I mean, it's not first person, it's third person, but I mean, I'm having enough problem hitting shit in Mass Effect, which is not the hardest game. There's a really annoying tendency in some BioWare games, and it's certainly in the first Mass Effect, there's a scene in which this happens, where there's like a big combat, and you cannot save the game during the combat. You immediately followed by a lengthy, unskippable cutscene, and that's super duper annoying, because if I failed and then there's another combat right away, and at no point in that sequence do you have the opportunity to save. See, when you if you fail in that second, much more difficult combat, you'd go back like 10 minutes before, and you'd have to sit through all that bullshit again. And I had to do it like 3 times. That was very irritating. So Steel Panthers was pretty cool. I must agree to that. I've still never played XCOM. Should I play XCOM? Tell me if I should play XCOM. How much does XCOM cost? Everybody seems to have a really high opinion of XCOM. There's also a modern game called Piss. I forget. Yeah, XCOM there's a bunch of XCOMs here. I don't know what's what. That some of which are very inexpensive. Terra Invicta, which is supposed to be XCOM inspired. That I've been looking at. That's supposed to be pretty good. But I won't buy it until it goes on sale. I didn't buy it last time it was on sale, so I'll buy it next. Maybe I'll buy it next time it goes on sale. Looks actually pretty neat. Rob Johnson says it goes on for far too long, which I'm prepared to believe, but I'm okay with that personally. So, I mean, if I've played through a whole campaign of Hearts of Iron, I'm going to be okay with that. So, computer war, I mean, I have generally a low opinion of computer war games, to be honest about it. Some of the recent Gary Grigsby stuff has impressed me, although I still suck at it. I did reasonably well in Gary Grigsby's War in the East. I have not bought the second one yet because it's $80. That's expensive. And now it has gone on sale, and it is on sale somewhere right now. There's a website called, I'll give you the name of it. There's a website called isthereanydeal.com. And you can set up a list to flag when stuff goes on sale. You could pick what sites you want to pay attention to. Like certain sites don't give you a Steam code. I made the mistake of buying Red Dead Redemption 2 without the Steam code, and it's a standalone install, and I fucking hate that. I like Steam to manage this. I've got Steam, I've got the EA bullshit launcher, which was called Origin at one point, but now it's just the EA launcher. I've got the Epic Games Store. Incidentally, anybody that's interested in Dragon Age Inquisition, last I checked, that's free on the Epic Games Store this week. You got to go in and grab it while it's free. But if you grab it while it's free, if you can get past the controls, the terrible, dreadful console port controls, it's pretty good. But the story-wise, it's like right up my alley. Yeah, it's on sale until looks like Thursday, something like that. On sale meaning free. So I have on this channel, actually, went back when I was doing video games, there's a full playthrough of Dragon Age Origins, including 1 or 2 of the DLCs. So there's a lot there. Yeah, this is exactly right. I don't want to deal with a million launches for a million friggin' things. It's a pain in the ass. So, sound card. I don't know why anybody who's not a professional musician or doing professional sound mixing or something like that would buy a sound card these days. So, but maybe that's just because I don't pay attention. So, all right. So what's up this week? I don't have a unboxing queued up, but my productive goal for tomorrow is to get the Harn video done, because there's a Candid Kickstarter from Columbia Games, and I really want to do a video on that before the Kickstarter ends, and I think it's got about a week left to run. So hopefully you will see that this week. I won't have a Traveler Tuesday video this week, but we will be on with Dan tomorrow night. I don't know if we have a guest or not. I hope we do, but I don't know. If it isn't, then there'll be a show tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Let me put it that way. So I'll agree with you with this. I have never paid, hold on a second. I'm going to pull it up and I'm going to read off my Epic Games library. Game of Thrones, the board game digital version, Alien Isolation, Amnesia Rebirth, Among Us, which I played because my wife wanted to play it, Ark, Survival Evolved, Borderlands 2, Borderlands the pre-sequel, Breath Edge, Car Mechanic Simulator, Control, Crying Suns, Death Stranding, something else, Destiny 2, Dragon Age Inquisition, Elite Dangerous, Fallout New Vegas, Frostpunk, Gloomhaven, Homeworld, Desert something or other, Kerbal Space Program, Killing Floor 2, Lawn Mowing Simulator, Lifeless Planet, Metro 2033, Redux, Mordhau, Mortal Shell, Pillars of Eternity, Rebel Galaxy, Saints Row, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, Sid Meier's Civilization something or other, Star Wars Battlefront 2, Surviving Mars, Tharsis, Torchlight 2, Tyranny, XCOM 2. I got XCOM 2. I don't need to buy it. The total dollar value of how much money I have given to the Epic Games Store is not a fucking nickel. I have never paid them a penny, and I've got like 30 games for free. So I'll agree with the statement of Alistair here that it is kind of worth it for games. I even picked up like extras. Some of these games I've got on Steam that I like bought. I bought an extra Elite. I got the free Elite Dangerous through the Epic Games Store, and I used that as a second account for Elite Dangerous. Computer Builder Simulator. That's exactly right. Why did I get Lawnmower Simulator? I don't know. It was free. There's a Power Washing Simulator too. People are simulating everything over here. So anyway, folks, we have had a great time tonight. We are running slightly over, so I'm going to let everybody go. Shit. It was on Thursday at one point. Thank you for pointing that out. I appreciate that. I am going to fix that as soon as the show is over right now. So I do appreciate the show. Somebody mentioned that to me before, and I forgot to change it. So 3D Printer Simulator. Yeah, where it flames out all the time. So everybody have a great rest of the night. We will see you all again soon, hopefully tomorrow night.